reached out to me to craft the European launch film for the brand new Sony FX5. At first, I thought I would have around 3 months to plan everything properly, build a huge pre-production and take my time with every creative decision. But that's not what happened. In reality, I had less than a month to plan, shoot and edit an entire beauty film along with all the launch content around it. And today, I'm going to break down how we made it. Being asked to create something for the European launch of the new FX camera felt like a dream. But at the same time, I immediately understood what it means. This was not just another project, this was Sony, this was a major camera launch, and with that came a huge amount of pressure. I wasn't making a traditional product video. I didn't want to put the camera on the table and talk about the spec for 10 minutes. Sony chose me to represent the commercial production side of this launch, so I needed to create something that felt like a real commercial. At first, Sony suggests the idea of creating a fake brand or a fake commercial universe. But with this short timeline, it quickly became too risky. We didn't have time to deal with possible brand conflicts, legal issues, or a whole fictional identity that will need to feel believable. So I decided to avoid that completely. Instead of creating a fake client, I wanted to create a metaphor, something simple, something visual, something that could speak without needing too much explanation. And then the slogan of the camera came in, lighting the way forward. For me, this sentence immediately means more than just a camera tagline. As a cinematographer, light is everything. It shapes, it reveals, it hides, it creates emotion, it gives life to an image. But in real life, light can also mean something else, a presence, a memory, a direction, something that remains when you don't really know where to go. During the pre-production, I lost my grandmother. My world felt like a collapsing, she was a true sunshine, a true light. So it obviously changed my creativity, it gave me a lot to things. Didn't wanted to make a film about grief. But grief changed the way I understood the term light. Suddenly, light was not only something I had to shape as a cinematographer, it became something more invisible. Something that stays, something that guides you when you don't really know where to go. So I wanted the film to exist on 2 levels. On the surface, it is about an artist trying to find a creativity again. But underneath, it is also a subtle tribute, a personal one, something about essence, memory, and the way art can help you move through loss without having to explain everything with words. So I took the features that actually made sense for the image and for the story. Open gate, anamorphic discrete, slow motion, triple base ISO, internal RAW, all those features as to sell the film first. The camera was not the subject, but the image was. So we jump straight into the pre-production. Writing, storyboarding, location scouting, maps, story mode, whoa, everything just melted together. And trying to find a way to highlight the camera in every possible situation without make it feel like a technical demo. But again, how do you shoot all those different elements in less than 2 weeks with a limited budget? The answer was the Canaria Islands. One of the rare places where you can find completely different visual worlds in a very small area. Volcanic landscape, forest, sand, ocean, mountains, rain, dry texture, colorful rocks, and way much more. Every location felt different, and this is where Marjorie became essential. Without her, in such a short amount of time, I would never have been able to find that many costumes, all the locations, and that much visual direction. She understood the mood board immediately, she already knew some of the Canaria Islands, and she quickly understood what I needed. Strong visual worlds, different textures, different colors, and outfits that could make the character feel timeless without becoming too literal. At one point, we had almost 15 locations planned across 3 islands, plus a rain studio and a manor in France. And everything had to be shot in less than 13 days. So I called my trust crew for the Canaria Islands. Marjorie will also be the main talent. Antoine came with us as gaffer. I knew he could handle any type of setup I would ask for, even with limited gear and limited time. And lastly, Guillaume. He came with us to shoot the behind the scene and doing some FPV. For the road trip, I decided to keep my lens package very minimal. I brought my DZO Arles, the 45mm and 50mm, and the same with the DZO Arles anamorphic lenses. First, because we do not have a lot of room or payload for the flights. And second, because many of the locations involve long walks, hike, or difficult access. I don't want to carry a heavy cine lens everywhere. To pair with the Arles, I also brought the Thypoch Simera-C lenses. And they were actually very important part of this project. They are much lighter, easier to carry, easier to operate, and for a solo operator without a first IC, that makes a huge difference. The Arles gave me a cleaner, more controlled, more commercial image, while the Simera-C had something slightly more organic, especially in the way they handle skin texture, edges, contrast and highlights. So that combination gave me both worlds, a polished commercial look, but with enough character to keep the image feel alive. Of course, I also brought some Sony autofocus lenses for the more complicated shots, because on a project like this you need to be realistic. Sometimes the best creative decision is just using the tools that allows you to get the shots. And because we didn't have a first IC, everything relied on me, the LiDAR, the tilt autofocus system, and the camera's own focus when needed. And then we flew the first island, Tenerife. For the first island, Tenerife, we didn't actually have that many locations to shoot. The plan was mainly built around two spots, Anaga Forest and Corona Forest Hall. Because we arrived one day before the real shoot starts, we had the luxury of doing a proper location scout, which ended up being the only real scouting day of the entire trip, and luckily it was probably the most useful one. Scouting Anaga Forest was easy, simple. The location was easy to access, the paths were really clear, and visually it immediately felt right for the film. But, in the other hand, Corona Forest Hall was a completely different story. The first road we tried was impossible with the car we had, and the second option, it was a nightmare. It was way too complicated, there was no real path, the walk was way too long, the access was rough, and with all the camera gear, lighting gear, wardrobe and everything we had to carry, it didn't make any sense anymore. So we made the decision to focus entirely on Anaga Forest.
Action.
This forest had to bring something different, something alive, something organic. It was also one of the only sequences where I wanted strong camera movement. So for those shots, we rigged the FX5 completely stripped down on the DJI Arles 5 Pro, combined with a tilta ring, to have better control over the movement while following Marjorie running through the forest. And this is where the size and weight of the FX5 became really interesting, because the camera stayed extremely light. It was really easy to rig, very easy to balance, and it didn't require a massive setup to start moving fast. For a project like this, with no big crew, no first IC and locations where you have to move quickly, that matters a lot. Being able to have a camera that can shoot Open Gate XOCN Raw and still be light enough to put on a gimbal without spending 3 hours balancing everything is a huge advantage. For this sequence, I decided to shoot anamorphic with the DZO Arles lenses and Open Gate. It was perfect for that. Because with Open Gate, you are using the full height of the sensor instead of cropping directly into the 16:9 frame. So when you shoot anamorphic, you get more vertical resolution, more image area, and a lot more flexibility on the image in this squeeze. Another thing that really helped during the sequence was the new LCD screen. It might sound like a small detail, but on set, it actually makes a huge difference. The screen is larger, way brighter, and because it uses a wider 6:9 ratio, it gives you much more comfort when you are operating directly from the camera body. And for anamorphic work, that was really valuable. Having a larger and wider screen directly on the camera made it much easier to judge the frame, the composition, and the movements. It also made focus picking much more readable. That is the kind of feature that doesn't always sound spectacular on paper, but when you are actually shooting it, especially in difficult solutions, it becomes extremely important. And that's the difference between shooting on real field and just on your studio reviewing gear. We had barely arrived in Tenerife, and we already had to leave for the next island. We arrived in Gran Canaria around 3 PM, and from that moment, everything became much more intense. We barely had enough time to pick up the car, try to shoot a location that ended not using it because, well, it was not worth it. Check into the hotel, prepare the gear again, and then we had to go straight into the hike towards the dunes. The dunes were a key moment in the film, not only because they look amazing, but because they represent something very specific in the character journey. A dry place, an open place, where there is nowhere to hide. And because none of the other location looks like this, it immediately gave the film a completely different scale. We shoot there twice, once at sunset and once again at sunrise. And this is where one of the new features of the FX5 really became useful, the detachable EVF. because right before sunset and right after sunrise, the light in the dunes was extremely bright, the sand was reflecting everywhere, and the sky was intense. And my external monitor just couldn't compete with the sun. So I switched to the AVF, and honestly it changed the way I was operating in that environment. I could isolate myself from the outside light, get fully immersed in the frame, and still have to all the camera tool I needed. False color, exposure information, focus tool, everything directly inside the camera. In the dunes, the EVF was not just more comfortable, it changed the way I could operate. When you are shooting in ocean light, in middle of sand, with a small crew and no video village, this kind of feature actually helps you keep control. The biggest challenge in the dunes was not finding good frame, it was the opposite. There were too many possibilities. Every direction looked interesting, every movement of the fabric, every gust of wind, every footprint in the sand, every change in the light could be a shot. And because we are using a brand new camera with internal RAW in XOCN, I knew the image could be pushed really far in post-production. So the temptation was huge to keep trying things, to improvise, to shoot more and more. But we had a shortlist, and we had to respect it, at least a little. That was probably one of the hardest parts of this project, staying disciplined, because when you are in a location like this, with a camera like this, your brain just keeps seeing new things everywhere. But production-wise, you can't chase every idea. You need to focus on what the film actually needs. And in the desert, we kept most of the shots very natural. A lot of them were shot only with available light, using the sun as a strong backlit to create hard contrast on the silhouettes and the face. This is usually how I like to shoot exteriors. I would say that maybe 80% of the time, I try to place the sun behind the subject, whether it is directly visible or not. It gives shape, separation, texture, and it keeps the image from feeling flat. For a few shots, we use a small portable reflector to bring just a little bit of light back into Marjorie's face, nothing too heavy, nothing to control, just enough to keep the emotion visible while still keeping the raw feeling of the location. And then we arrive to Lanzarote. The last island, the densest one in terms of locations, and definitely the island where the early wake-ups start to hurt the most. For Lanzarote, I made a decision to prioritize two moments of the days as much as possible, sunrise and sunset. Because for a beauty film like this, I wanted to get the maximum amount of footage with a soft cinematic beauty light. Spoiler alert, every single morning we had a thick layer of fog until around 8 AM, probably because of the heat, the wind and the sand in the air, so yeah. Perfect. For this island, I'm not going to talk about every single location because otherwise this behind the scene will end up being just 3 hours long. So instead of breaking down every spot, I'm going to focus on a few specific locations and more importantly, how the FX5 was used in advantage in each of them. The first one was Las Grietas. In the story, this location represents a visual shift in the emotional state of the character, a transition almost like a fracture, and this canyon was perfect for that. The shapes, the lines, the shadows, the layer of rock, the way the character could disappear and reappear inside the frame. Everything felt connected to the idea of transformation. It was not just a beautiful location, it was a physical representation of the story. And technically, this is also where the camera started to make a lot of sense. Inside some of the cracks, the light was changing very quickly. You could go from ocean light to deep shadow in just few steps. This is where the triple base ISO became really interesting. By pushing the camera to 4000 ISO, I was able to keep a clean image without having to use an extremely strong ND just to keep the exposure where I wanted. It gave me more flexibility, especially in a location where I had no time, no lighting setup, or no possibility to control the environment. There is one hero shot from Las Grietas that became a really important moment in the film. We placed Marjorie on a rock inside one of the cracks of the canyon. The light was not entering the space the way I wanted, so we used a silver reflector to burn the sun directly inside the canyon from the top. But instead of keeping it static, we moved the reflector during the shot, and by doing that, we created this moving beam of light crossing the frame. It was simple, no VFX, no big lighting setup, just the sun, a reflector, and the right movement. But it suddenly gave the shot so much more meaning. It became more than just a beauty frame. It became the moment where the light feels alive, where the transformation becomes visible. This is also what I love about static shots. A static frame does not have to feel dead. If something meaningful moves inside the frame, this shot can become even stronger than if the camera was moving for no reason. And when you keep the camera movement rare, the moment you finally move the camera becomes much more powerful. On two different locations, we had very short window of light, but some of those shots became, in my opinion, some of the most beautiful frames of the whole project. The softness of the light, the dress, the wind, the ocean, there was just something there, something emotional. One of those beach locations, the sun was going down, and the ocean suddenly started to become more and more aggressive. So we placed Marjorie on a huge rock in the middle of the water. I stayed in Open Gate because I wanted as much image as possible, and I switched to 120 frames per second to make the movement of the water feel more powerful and more suspense. With DaVinci Resolve, I knew I could potentially push the slow motion even further if needed. This is where slow motion became very intentional for me. I shot a lot of slow motion on the Canaria Islands, but it was not just air for making the image look pretty, it was a way to make the character feel suspended between reality and imagination. For portrait work, 24 frames per second and slow motion don't communicate the same feeling at all. A slow movement of the hand, a dress reacting to the wine, the ocean, the sand, the body moving through a landscape, all those small things became much more emotional when time slowed down. It gives the character a feeling of being outside of reality. You need to think before you shoot. There are the reality of the film, the island are more like emotional world, and that difference in frame rate helped me separate those two feelings. You just have to choose the right tool for the right moment. Speaking about pushing the camera, the low light capabilities showed up again in LANZAROTE. One of the frames was shot in almost complete darkness, with just a headlamp, a reflector, and myself running like an idiot in the sand to create some atmosphere. No LED lights, no big setup, just a small practical source, a bit of reflection and some movement in the air. And because of the raw flexibility, the low light performance and the way we could push the white balance and color in posts, we ended up with a shot that felt way bigger than the setup actually was. I will probably make another dedicated video to break down some of the shots in details because there is way too much to say. Anyway, let's jump back to France after sleeping in an airport for 7 hours because there was still a lot waiting for us, including putting the FX5 under heavy rain. The idea was to see the character painting under the rain, almost like she is inside her own mind, being creatively unlocked by something she cannot control. For the camera setup, I decided to use the body as stripped down as possible with a rain protection cover. I already wanted to shoot this sequence with the Arles lenses, but I quickly switched to the Sony G-Master lenses, mainly for simplicity. With the rain cover, the focus motor was complicated to manage and changing focal length was way too complicated. With the G-Master zoom, I had autofocus with oscillating and the ability to change the focal length quickly without opening the whole setup. In this situation, practically was the creative choice. That's one of the strengths of this camera. It can be stripped down and still remain a very powerful cinema tool. False color was also extremely useful. It is a tool I use a lot on almost every production because it is reliable, fast and precise. One quick look and I know where my exposure is. Having it directly inside the camera means I don't always need an external monitor. For some situations, the camera screen had everything I needed, especially here in low light under rain, where I needed to make sure the background was falling into darkness and that I wouldn't have to fight the image too much in the grade. For the lighting, we kept the setup pretty simple but very intentional. The most important source was a strong backlight, because if you want rain to look dramatic and beautiful, you need to backlit it. Without the strong backlight, the water just disappears, so we placed a big source behind the rain to catch every drop. Above the rain system, we created a large soft top light with a 2x2 diffusion frame, and for some of the close-ups we added a small fill light on the side just to bring back a little bit of detail into the face. Stop. The last part of the shoot was dedicated of the beginning and the ending of the film. I wanted a location that felt old, timeless and slightly disconnected from the modern world, something that could make the journey feel more unreal, more spiritual, almost like fantasy. And again, Marjorie from this Manor, and there was one room that was almost perfect for the atmosphere I was looking for. Wood, space, large window, a lot of texture. It already felt like a place where time had stopped. With a few props, the black canvas, the statues, and the right costume, we could immediately understand that it was an artist space, a place full of an old life, but a life that no longer evolved. This location was very different from the Canary Islands. They were reacting to the world. Here, I wanted to control everything. And I actually liked having both types of cinematography in the same project. On the islands, we were mostly shaping natural light with mirrors and reflectors, showing how the camera reacts to real environments. In the Manor, we were creating the light completely. But I still wanted the contrast ratio to feel connected to the rest of the film. I didn't want the entire to feel like a different project. So even if the lighting was controlled, the image still needed to keep the same kind of depth, contrast and softness. We placed most of our source outside on the balcony, pushing light through the windows, because the sun was quickly moving above the Manor, so I didn't want to fight against the natural light all day. Here, there was almost no slow motion planned. Most of the scenes were static, because emotionally this part needed to feel grounded, really present. The only real camera movement in the intro was a slow pushing on a motorized dolly. Starting wide allowed us to establishing the room and the character situation, and as the camera slowly moving closer, it guides the viewer towards the center of the story. The blank canvas, the hesitation, the end that doesn't know what to do yet. One of the shots I really wanted was a tight-edge close-up with a slash of light. For that, we simply create a black box with floppies and negative fills. So I used the Sony 24-70mm and added the macro diopter filters to reduce the focus distance and create a stronger magnified feeling. And that's how we wrapped the shoots. But for me, the project was far from over. The post-production was going to be just as intense. No real rest, no real break. And this is where Open Gate became extremely useful again. I could crop, reframe, stabilize, and create different versions while still keeping a strong image quality. For a project that needed horizontal, vertical, YouTube, social media, and marketing assets, that flexibility was essential. Then came the color grading. And honestly, grading this project was a real pleasure. This is where the internal RAW recording in XOCN really made sense. The FX5 gives you access to XOCN with different compression options like C1 and C2, depending on the balance you need between image quality, file size, and storage. For this project, I decided to shoot in C1, not because I wanted to compromise on quality, but because it made the most sense for the final use on the film. C1 is a lighter compression option, but visually for a project mainly made for social media, the difference is almost impossible to see. And in terms of storage, it makes a massive difference by the end of the project. Having that kind of high-end workflow becoming more accessible is a huge thing for filmmakers. Having the option to choose between different compression levels is a real game changer nowadays, especially with storage prices increasing because of AI. And if you are interested, I also recently created a pack of 3 LUTs and power grades inspired by my last set projects with different looks and tint variations. You can find the link in the description, and for the first 50 people you can use the code SonyFX5 for 15% off. This project was a real adventure in every possible way, from the excitement of the first email to the pressure of the deliverables to running across France and the Canaria Islands trying to find the shots. It was stressful, it was exhausting, it was sometimes messy, and it was definitely not perfect. But it reminded me why I do this. We spent more than 15 days almost non-stop with the team, and sometimes in the middle of all that pressure, I had to remind myself that this is my job, that I was doing all of this to bring a camera launch to the life. Sony. That years of learning, personal projects, mistakes, communication, discipline and obsession had somehow led me there. Working with Sony was not something that happened overnight. It was the result of years of trying every day, failing, creating, posting, learning and continuing even when nothing was guaranteed. And at some point, sitting on that dune, watching the sun go down after an exhausting day, I felt something I will probably never forget. A part of me stayed there, not because everything was perfect, but because for a moment I was exactly where I had dreamed of being. And maybe that is what this project was really about, not only lighting the way forward, but learning to recognize when the light is already guiding you. There will be so much more to say about this project. Technically, emotionally, and of course more breakdowns are coming, more feature video are coming too, and I will definitely go deeper into some specific shot and setup. But for now, I just want you to say thank you. Thank you for supporting me since so many weeks, so many videos, and always sending me so good feedback. So thank you, and in the meanwhile guys, go out, keep creating, and I will see you in the next one. Ciao.